had episodes where guests didn't show up. There's been, everything that probably could have happened has happened. And I think, or I hope I've gotten better at just understanding and appreciating that, in as much as in that moment it feels like the lowest possible point. I don't know if you watch The Simpsons, but there's this clip where Homer goes, "Yet, this is the worst moment of your life, yet it can't get worse." So that contrast does help.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Sound of Accra podcast. I go by the name of Adrian Daniels. If this is your first time listening, this is the show where we speak with top Ghanaian founders, entrepreneurs and creators worldwide with the aim of leaving you behind with meaningful takeaways that you can apply in life, business and career. For today's show notes, I'd like you to head over to thesoundofaccra.com/GCR. That's thesoundofaccra.com/GCR for all of today's wisdom, nuggets and references. And just some housekeeping, guys. If you're watching YouTube, hit the like button, hit subscribe, leave a comment below and let us know what you think of today's episode. If you listen to Spotify podcast, wherever you get your podcasts on, a 5-star review is very much appreciated. Drop us an email as well. Check the links below and let us know what you think of today's show and our podcast in general. That's the housekeeping out the way. I want to get straight into the episode. I'm joined today by Kwadzo, aka Cyril. He's one of the co-founders and CEO of GCR, aka Gold Coast Reports. This is Ghana's biggest podcast network. Really excited about this one. You may have heard of Sincerely Accra. It's the biggest podcast in Ghana, and they've got some other fantastic shows on the podcast network. They're really disrupting the space. I like what they're doing, from their branding to the quality of the show, to the way the show is even mixed and mastered. I've always been a fan of their content, and it's just more than an honor to sit with the CEO and co-founder Kwadzo. Kwadzo, thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you.
Studios.
Nice to meet you, Adrian, and excited for the conversation.
Hey. We had a little brief conversation on set about your name. So I kept pronouncing it Kwadzo, but it's actually pronounced Kwadzo.
Yeah.
Tell us where that comes from.
So my dad is also a Monday born, and he spells it Kwadzzo. So I'm also a Monday born, and I kept the same spelling. Well, they kept the same spelling for me, I should say.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we always have to kind of be different and spell.
I mean, because I have people attempt to pronounce it how it's spelled, but I see where the confusion comes. It's just regular Kwadzo. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, I'm excited. And so in terms of how we met, it's crazy because this weekend, we're due, or we're supposed to be doing, a podcast crash course in Accra, in collaboration with AGR. And then I had an idea. I was like, let's get AfriPods involved, because at the end of the day, it kind of links back to them using AfriPod's platform, which is one of your partners.
Yeah.
And of course, for you guys, for those of you who don't know, AfriPods is Africa's biggest podcast hosting platform. We'll leave a link in the description so you guys can sign up. Shout out to Molly if you're watching.
Shout out to Kev as well.
Shout out to who? Kev. Yeah, he's like the head of marketing, I think. Is it?
Operations officer.
Yeah. Okay, so CEO, whatever they want to call it. So yeah, shout out to Kev, shout out to Molly. We had Molly in the show on the A Conversation series. Really good episode. People loved it. And I love what they're doing. AfriPod. So anyway, it's supposed to be doing Accra's podcast crash course this weekend. And what happened was I decided to get AfriPods involved because it kind of made sense. And then the next thing I knew, on the email thread, this guy pops up in the email thread. I'm like, what? Not just GCR, but the CEO and the co-founder. I'm like, this is whoa. Like, I've always, because it was actually on my, it was on my mission, this trip, to kind of reach out to you guys, kind of connect, and maybe even connect with the Sincerely Accra guys. I like what you guys are doing and see how we can kind of like work together in that sense. And then this guy pops up in the email thread, and now we're here, So, again, thank you again for, allowing me to kind of like use your studios. Let's go straight into Cyril. So tell us a little bit about GCR. What does GCR do? What does Gold Coast Report do?
That's always a tricky question. We are a podcast network, and in our world of multimedia, it's not just podcasts, and that also includes audio and video as well. But we think of ourselves as hopefully telling really exciting stories, and we use podcasts, primarily audio, to do that.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And when you and your co-founder decided to launch Gold Coast Report, was it always the plan to have a network, or was it just going to be one or two podcasts? Was it supposed to be a radio show? Tell us.
It was a series of fortunate events, I would say. So the initial plan was, when I returned back, I reached out to Donald, my co-founder, and the initial plan was, I was a huge fan of The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, and the idea was to have a late night type show. So we had put together a proposal and we had shared that with DSTV Ghana.
Wow.
We had nothing back. At that point, I was a huge fan of podcasts as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then the suggestion was, hey, why don't we record a test episode and see what that sounds like? So I invited Donald over to my place, my living room. I remember I took out my phone. It was a BlackBerry Z30. And then
Berry on the podcast. Wow.
No, I mean, BlackBerries had the best notification system and keyboard. I could go on for days about that, but that's not this podcast.
I think I believe you because, you know, how it's built, the way it's built, I can definitely.
Yeah, it just made so much more sense.
Control Center is fantastic.
Right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Anyway, so we recorded a test episode and we liked what we heard. And then I had the opportunity to use a cousin studio back at Spintex. Shout out to Fui. And we decided to invite some friends. So it really was just, we put a call. I was like, hey guys, we are trying to do this thing called podcasting. If you're interested, do show up. Everybody showed up. So everybody kind of had to be on the show. So we started with 3 shows. After the whistle for sports and the guys, we had the other room, which touched on gendered issues from a gendered lens. And then we had Free on Mind, which was our general discussion show. The idea being everybody got to do something. And we started off as a network because everybody really showed up.
Okay, cool. So, and everyone kind of like had their own kind of like specialty or niche that they wanted to kind of specialize in. And
I mean, we had our interest. I wouldn't say it was like specialty or niche. We really just had our interest.
Yeah.
The guys wanted to talk sports.
Yeah.
The women wanted to focus on issues that were important to them, that weren't getting prominence in the traditional media.
Yeah.
And everybody else was like, I guess I want to have like a rant or two. And that's how Free Your Mind was born. So it really started from our interest and then grew into the network, into what GCR is now.
Brilliant. And I think it works well when, let's say you got other people that want to have their own show and they got different interests. That kind of is an advantage for a podcast network, because typically when you see podcast networks, everyone has, you know, their own show and it's usually like a different genre, whether it's true crime, whether it's sports, entertainment, whether it's factual, personal development, business, and it kind of works well. Are there any podcast networks out there that you kind of like keep an eye out for, that you kind of admire or you listen to?
As in, what podcast do I listen to? As a
consumer.
Oh, yeah.
We can talk about that as well. What podcasts like you enjoy listening to?
Oh, yeah, I listen to, I mean, obviously, one, I am a fan of the medium. So if I wasn't doing GCR, I still would be listening to podcasting. Yeah. I do listen to a fair number of shows. A couple of shows that I've been listening to for like, some might almost be a decade now. There's the Low Show. There's a Low podcast. Yeah, the Low podcast. It's a basketball podcast. I use that to follow because I don't always watch the NBA games. So that's a good way to catch up with what's going on. There is Pivot. It's a business tech podcast. Yeah, huge fan of Kara and Scott. So that's always fun. And obviously there's all the shows on GCR that I also enjoy and also can also have to listen to make sure we are putting out good content. So After the Whistle, Sex and Sanity, Sincerely Accra, Is It Crack? I could keep going. Hairpins and Straight. Yeah, all of them.
Fantastic. One thing I really admire is the branding and just the names, the branding, and just how you kind of go about packaging your podcast. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll dive into that a little bit deeper. But before we get to that, just tell us a little bit about kind of like yourself. Like, how did you, like, what was your background that's kind of like helped you to kind of get into the podcast space?
That's a tricky one because I think it probably was just a combination of interest and wanting to not have GCR as an idea die. Because like I said, we started off on wanting to be a late night type TV show and we had no bites and we didn't own a TV station. So the accessible thing that we had access to was a studio space.
Okay.
We couldn't be a radio station, but we could be a podcast.
Yeah.
So we did that. In terms of my interests or background, you mean what I studied? Because
I mean,
I really just came into it.
Like, kind of like maybe if you worked before, if you
in media, no, like
nothing.
Nothing I did really was related to media.
That's amazing.
yeah, it really was just,
Yeah.
this is something I've been listening to as a fan. It's a space that it felt accessible. It felt like we could also be in that space.
Yeah.
And the question was, why not? And everybody said yes. So really, why not?
And I think that's the one thing you can take into the spaces, being a consumer yourself for how many years. You know, because the first podcast I ever listened to, I think it was a religious one.
Okay.
It was, I think, 2010.
Yeah.
I got my first iPhone, which was the iPhone 3GS. I saw podcasts.
The app.
I saw a podcast was on iTunes.
Yeah.
That's how I discovered it. And then before you know it, I just started to consume it. So that kind of helped me to get into the space. So I think podcasters have also come from backgrounds of being heavy consumers themselves, and they just get ideas in terms of how they can kind of go and get their own.
Yeah, because it always felt organic. It's like you listen, it's like, wait, I could do this, or I want to talk about this, but then I don't see either my voice or I don't see topics or issues that I care about being spoken about. And then the next step is maybe I just do it, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a popular way some podcasts start. It's because, oh, there's no one that's talking about this. Same with me, right? In terms of garnering entrepreneurs and creators, I was like, there's no one talking about this. There's no one just dedicated to this. There's like lots of content on YouTube, like random interviews, and but there's no dedicated platform. And you know, this is how the Sound of Accra was born. So I can kind of relate to you 100%. All right, let's keep this conversation going. So in terms of the Gold Coast Report, tell us some of the key shows that you have on the show. Of course, it's Cyril Accra.
So Cyril Accra gets a shout out mainly because it is the #1 show in Ghana. So shout out to the team, Joseph and Kwame.
Okay.
On the network, we also have other creators who are also equally putting in the work. So there's Free On Mind that's hosted by Tatas and One Love. There's Is It Crack, that's Kelly and Dinam. There's Hairpins and Straights. There's Baba and Queen. We also have After the Whistle, there's Kawawa, there's Smiley, there's Keo, there's Corey, there's Van Gelder, there's Crack. That's a squad for the sports show.
How many hosts altogether?
So everything, we probably pushing close to 2025.
25 people.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I know it's we also have been very intentional, or perhaps welcoming, in terms of just making sure that people are able to work towards the shows they want to create. Because like we said early on, you are listening to podcasts, and if you aren't finding the thing you care about being spoken or discussed, the next impulse is, how do I create that, or how do I become that show that I want to see? And for us at GCR, we've been, or we hope we are intentional in being the space that people can actually build stuff like that.
Yeah. I think what you've done is really remarkable, because coming from someone that has not necessarily a media background or technology per se background, but I mean, what you brought into the space is your consumer experience of listening to podcasts. How have you got to the point? Because the production element is fantastic. Like the quality is spot on. You know, you understand, it's something I want to, aspire to. How would you say that you've developed that ear where the production, you've been able to get the podcast to such a high level, where the production is such a high level, at least the audio perspective? I don't watch the video too, especially the audio is phenomenal. How did you develop that ear and that?
I mean,
it's fantastic.
Give yourself a long enough time. I would say if you go back to our early shows and you listen to our episode 1, you probably see that these guys were just mucking around in terms of we just just had to press record and then trying to figure it out. But then I think for us being in the space, it was important that we represented and presented content that we would also want to consume, which is why it's important, because one, I was a fan of the medium. If I don't see myself listening to the show, then what am I doing?
Yeah.
You understand? So things like improving our audio quality, things like being intentional when it comes to structuring episodes, things like, okay, how do we get intentional planning? Like stuff like that came naturally because it was important to get the show to be in the best possible position it could be. And the only way we could do that was by making sure our audio recording is better, making sure our editing is better, making sure our planning, post, all of that is working well. So it really is just driving towards the best possible versions of our shows. And we don't think we are there yet. It's like whatever progress we can make, whatever incremental step we can take, we're always trying to do that.
It's interesting because I posted something to my WhatsApp status yesterday talking about incremental progress. And also the other day, Mr. Beast think I heard a quote from Mr. Beast saying, I think your first 100 YouTube videos or something like that, once you've done the first 100 YouTube videos, look at ways where you can improve the episode by 1% every single time. So I really admire what you're doing. You'll be looking at ways you can constantly improve. And when you constantly improve little by little, it just takes you to where everything's just excellent.
Yeah. And also it's important to also have the team that also sort of buys in, because you could want to improve as much as you want, but then if everybody doesn't buy in, then it becomes a much more difficult process. So just everybody understanding that this is something that we are working towards, either the shows themselves or the production team or everybody else that helps us out with events, because it's all driving towards a goal. And the goal is, how can we be better than we were last time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's very insightful. Okay, cool. I mean, you mentioned, having a team is important. Let's segue over there, Kwadzo. So, of course, you mentioned 25 people, in terms of, that's hosts, right?
So that's hosts, yeah.
And then you got,
in terms of all the shows
around that as well.
Yeah.
In terms of like maybe designers, editors, etc.
Yeah.
You've got to have like a system in place, structure in place, of course, for things to kind of like run smoothly and for things to work. I mean, what does that look like, roughly?
I would like that system to be better. That's all I would say. No, but we do have, there's a method to our madness presently. So if you think of it, think of all our shows as essentially having their own little silos. So if this is a show, this is the audio editor assigned, this is the graphic designer assigned, and if it's a videographer and editor, this is the person assigned. So that is structured per every show. Where it probably can get cleaner is probably the communication, and just to make sure things are a bit more snappier, because once you have that many people, things tend to get a bit, what's happening? But other than that, I think we sort of got, this is a show, these are the people working on it. Now it's just about making sure communications are clear and everybody knows exactly what they need to do and when things are due, because that's also a big one, and things are pushed out on time and on schedule. Yeah,
it's time, it's resources, it's being prompt, it's the quality, it's the deliveries, so many moving parts with podcast. That's why I always tell people, like, this with podcasting, you can't just get up and do it, especially if you want to be excellent. There's so many moving parts, and when you kind of neglect some of those parts, that's when things can get messy. Of course, to get to where you are today, it's been quite a bit of work. What would you say is some of the challenges that you've had in terms of coming up?
In terms of coming up,
has there been any kind of low moments that you've had? How long has it been running for again?
So we are in year 8, if I believe. Yeah, I think we're in year 8.
I'm half of that.
I know, right? No, but in terms of low moments, there's always going to be low moments, to be very honest. We've had episodes where the mic wasn't turned on. We've had episodes where guests didn't show up. There's been, everything that probably could have happened has happened. And I think, or I hope I've gotten better at just understanding and appreciating that, in as much as in that moment it feels like the lowest possible point. I don't know if you watch The Simpsons, but there's this clip where Homer goes, "Yet, this is the worst moment of your life yet. It can't get worse." So that contrast does help. In as much as a low point, there's a much lower point waiting for you. So in the grand scheme of things, this really isn't that bad. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, that's perfect. That will do for sure. So, I mean, I've experienced that as well, like not turning the mic on. I mean, turning the mic on, that's not been an issue. It's more like not turning the video camera on. So I had one guest who is kind of image conscious, and she realized the camera was turned on, and I was like, sorry. But I had a backup iPad recording pointed at her, so I took some clips from that. But yeah, can relate to the loneliness.
And then we've had like power go out. Like it's everything's happened
during the season, man.
Yeah.
The light went off, and then the generator went off, and then I had to use batteries to kind of finish the recording.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, let's go there. Actually, what's the challenge? I mean, there's doing the podcast, there's having the podcast, but there's having the podcast in Africa. Tell us a bit about that, like, because it's a different culture. Africans or Ghanaians per se, I mean, they're more used to maybe more traditional media, maybe TV. Okay, of course, people are now more inclined to social media, Instagrams, YouTube and stuff. How would you see Ghanaians take to podcasting in terms of from a consumer perspective?
So I am perhaps a bit more bullish on podcasting. I mean, kind of have to be if you're being in space, right? It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
But I remember one of the very first decks or proposals that we worked on. The phrase I had in there was that ours is an oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, everything our culture speaks to, it's oral. We tell stories. We share information by laughing, by passing on a proverb. All of that is oral. And what is podcast if not recorded? It's in our blood.
Yeah.
It's really now just about figuring out or developing content that speaks to more people. That's really what it is, because I think our growth or our sustained growth is testament to the fact that when people discover us, when they tune in, they like what they hear. So there's definitely an audience and a market out there. It really is just going to be a function of time, more people discovering us, and then also creating content that also speaks to more people at the same time. So it's that balance that we keep trying to find. Yeah.
Again, there's just so many moving parts, getting people to discover you, visibility, marketing. It's just, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, we'll all kind of move into kind of like the business side of things very shortly.
Okay.
One thing I love about Gold Coast Report is the live shows aspect. I think you guys have got that spot on.
Yeah.
Like with Sincerely Accra, how they do the live shows, and then you kind of like got maybe brand partnerships. I know maybe Spotify did some stuff with you guys. Just talk us briefly about the live shows. You kind of like, what the model is behind that. Having like, are you purposeful about the live shows? Are we going to do maybe 1 or 2 live shows a month, or it's just whenever you feel like, oh, let's just do a live show? Because at the end of the day, it's a business, right? So you want to kind of like make it work.
Yeah, it's definitely purposeful, just because there's some planning required.
Yeah.
So you can't just like show up and run a live show. But I want to say back in 2017, 2018, I would go on record and probably ask someone to challenge if we are wrong. But I feel like we had the first live show, if not in Africa, I can say West Africa. This was back in 2017. And for us, it was really that organic need where we had people responding to us, getting in touch with us, and just going like, we would just love to see you guys, And then I know you mentioned we'll talk about the business side as well, but where we are in terms of brands and engaging with our audience, it was important for them to have a snapshot to see what our audience is, because I can send you a deck that tells you my listenership and that gives you a profile, but it's more impactful when you see what they look like. So back in, I think 2018, back in 2018, we had the first live show, GCR Live, our front back.
Okay.
And it was amazing.
Really?
Like, after we were done, people stayed.
Wow.
And we were confused because we had just planned we'll have a conversation and everybody leaves. But then everybody stayed. And I think for us, that was the early inkling that, it's not just an audience, it's actually a community as well, because people came, total strangers, but then they liked the person that they met in the space enough to want to be there and hang out with them.
Okay.
Our initial plan was to do the same thing again, and then COVID happened.
Gosh.
So that derailed plans, but it also gave us a much longer runway to think, because after outside was opened, what we ended up launching was our live podcast events, Mosaic. And with Mosaic, we're a bit more intentional in that it wasn't just a live conversation, but then we also made sure to also include a stage to give access to emerging artists as well, because now we think of Mosaic as an audio festival. And for us, everything related to audio, we are looking to bring as part of Mosaic. Last year, we added a stand-up comedy set to it as well. So it's that kind of growth in terms of, one, being intentional, two, looking at what the community is interested in. And then for us, as capacities increase, how do we improve the product offering that we're also serving to our audience / community as well?
I love the model. I love how you've evolved and how you've just like diversified the product offering as well. Like live comedy show, I'm looking forward to when you guys start that. I think there's one at the end of the month, I think, in February. So I'm looking forward to coming down.
Hopefully we all die laughing.
I want to stay alive, but I don't know about it.
I know.
Need design for your startup? Switch to WORKSPACEglobal.com, the internet's simplest design service. Skip the agency and freelancer headaches. Our platform connects you instantly to vetted creatives to get your logos, websites, and marketing materials fast. all managed for you by our team, software, and AI. So you can focus on what you care about most, growing your business. Try us for free, workspaceglobal.com. Let me double tap on COVID, because you mentioned COVID. I mean, it's probably it's a recurring narrative for so many guests I've had on the show. What was that like, navigating COVID? Especially, of course, you're on the podcasting space, but you're in the business of things as well. What was that like?
It was, well, I think for me personally, it gave me a chance to slow down, actually, because I think up until that point, it really had been a whole lot of on and on and on. When we first started GCR, in terms of the editing, that was mostly on me. And then as we grew, the admin aspect also grew as well. So striking that balance, there was no balance, I should say. It was just like, we're doing it all. COVID gave a chance to just sort of, well, if you're trying to grow in this sense, does it make sense to have you do all this editing and do all this as well? So it gave me a chance to work out, okay, what do we offload? What do we need help in? What do we get support with? It also gave us a chance to also test our remote recording, which shout out to the ATW boys. They now record exclusively remote.
That's one of the shows, yeah?
That's a sports show. Yeah, just because then we had, platforms like Riverside and Zencaster, they popped up.
Riverside is fantastic.
Yeah, they just popped up during that period. And it gave us a chance to also just be a bit more intentional in terms of, in as much as we have studio space, we shouldn't necessarily limit our guests to the people who are right in front of us in terms of physically. So COVID really was just like a pause moment. We got to see where GCR, where everything was, see where the Ghana podcasting landscape was looking like, and then sort of chart the direction we wanted to go in, because we find ourselves in this, I want to say tricky, but perhaps this unique space where there's a bit of dictating, giving direction in terms of what we are doing, but then also by virtue of being the ones ahead, we're also learning and discovering at the same time. So how do we make sure that we are learning the lessons we should? We are sharing information with everybody else in the space, and we are hopefully being good enough leaders so that everybody that's interested in podcasting can just go, okay, this is what these guys are doing. These are the good bits. This is what I like to replicate, because for us, we really do want to grow the ecosystem and space. And COVID allowed us to do a lot more planning, thinking, like structure Mosaic for what we want it to be, our shows, the directions we want to go, brands, how do you want to approach them, all of that. It gave us a much needed pause, it turned out.
Explain to the audience Mosaic. So of course, you guys have other kind of ventures that you have, so in terms of supporting, people that want to get into this space. Just tell us a bit more about that.
About Mosaic Day.
Yeah, because I know you have something like the labs as well.
Yes. So Mosaic is our live podcast event. We use that to cap the end of our calendar. So we typically run end of February, March through to November. It's quite a long year. So Mosaic allows us to just be like, all right, we are done, wrap up. We'll catch you guys the next year. And that's always fun to plan and look forward to. The program you mentioned, our GCR Labs, that was us being intentional in terms of trying to grow the space. And again, I'm in love with the first words that we had when we thought about GCR Labs, which was to be the resource that we hope we had. Because I'll be very honest, it has been learning by trial, combat and fire in terms of what we need to do and what we should be doing. Because over the last couple of years, it's quite easy to look up resources or what you should do in terms of podcasting. But as you mentioned or alluded to earlier on, it's different, because by virtue of being on this lovely continent of ours and being in Ghana, there are certain things that doesn't translate as well. To give a very simple one, file size. Everybody recommends in this or recording, just make sure you have your file size probably in .wav, or if you're exporting to MP3, highest possible quality setting. Well, that could be a problem if the listeners are a bit data conscious.
100%.
So someone listens to your show, they like your show, but then they realize every time they listen, they down 200 or 300 or 500 megabytes. What's that about? You understand? They will stop listening to you, or they'll only listen to you when they have access to either good or free Wi-Fi. So these were things where we had to early on find the balance between, okay, what's a good show length? What's a good compromise on audio quality?
So lots of optimization as you're going along.
Lots of optimization, lots of this isn't working, this is how we figure it out. Okay, people are responding to this is how we reach them. Yeah, all of that. It's like real-time testing and application.
Amazing. So you're allowing the data to kind of inform what decisions and actions you take just to improve.
As much as we can rely on the data, we rely on the, I guess you call it anecdotes, like listeners or audience who are able to reach us and tell us what their experience is. Because also a reality is, in doing this for so long, you can really get tunnel vision in terms of, okay, this is what I want us to do. And sometimes you might have the best of ideas, but then again, our listeners are a key part of the process. And we only really ever hear from them towards the end after a product is out, which is a bit, kind of have to wrap your head around it. So it has to be that intentional loop system where we know that we are planning this amazing episode or this amazing event, but at the end, the listener lets us know whether we did a good job, and that has to be factored in for the next one. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I think it's quite key as a podcaster to look at the data. Again, it's not, people can get caught up in tunnel vision, just thinking they know what they want, but it's really important to understand, if you try and swim against what the market wants and go against you have to understand what the market wants by looking at the data, looking at the insights and using that to inform you where to go. I think that's really important. And since you guys been around for quite a while now, has there been any kind of like very interesting insights that you kind of stumble upon and you've been like, oh, that's quite interesting? Maybe for example, 80% of our listeners are female, or 100% of our listeners are all like femites. I don't know.
Well, I don't think we have, this is jumping out at you type surprising, but I would say, so Sex and Sanity is a show on our network, and the data shows it's it's second only to Sincerely Accra. And the number of times that people will probably publicly swear they don't listen, or just because in terms of, you see the social media engagement and how people react to content that we post, people listen to that a lot. So it's one of those things where it's like, oh, y'all are listening, but not really being public with it. But yeah, that's probably a fun little interesting when it comes to the data.
Interesting. I mean, it's just interesting with like podcasting, like, you know, some people can quietly listen to a podcast. You may never know. But what's great about it is that there's such a level of intimacy that's built when people listen to a podcast, especially on a podcast it's published on a regular basis as well. You build that connection and audience. And I think that's the fantastic thing that you guys have, the live shows. You're constantly doing it, and it just allows the audience to come out and just kind of like, you know, join. And I'm guessing a lot of you that come up with the live shows, they're like, since they're like, you know, podcast listeners of the actual podcasts or the GCR network, or not necessarily. You want to come out and just have a good time.
I mean, we've had like a good mix. We have people who obviously show up because it's a podcast they listen to, so they want to see the host, or they want to be a part. Then we have people who also show up because a friend has dragged them along. And for Mosaic as well, like, you also have this you also have this unique experience where people are showing up because over the years we've hopefully done a good job of creating an experience that people enjoy and like. So to touch on that a bit, one thing we are very intentional about is everybody who comes in is as much as possible treated equally. So we don't necessarily, we don't have VIP tickets. We don't have like this for the cool kids type thing. You know, it's like everybody comes in and we all here for this one reason, and we're all here to have fun. And it's good to have spaces like that, because then even if you're a hardcore podcast fan or you're not, you still hopefully enjoying the experience for what it is. And I think people also tend to enjoy that as well. So we've had a fair number of people who probably don't listen to our podcast as much as we would want them to, but they will show up to our events because when they come, it's like, it's a good time, might as well. Yeah.
That's good. It means money in your pocket, you know, you come into the show thing.
I ain't mad at it.
Yeah. Brilliant. I mean, it's just quite interesting just to hear like the Ghana podcasting landscape as well. I think it's growing. Would you say it's growing? It's making progress compared to other countries. Do you kind of look at that in terms of just from an African perspective, like the podcast, like how you guys, or how the podcast of space in Ghana is doing compared to other African countries? Do you kind of pay attention to that, or we just focus on what you guys are doing and let everything take care of itself?
We definitely pay attention to other African countries because, one, by virtue of being a digital product, it just means that our audience, in as much as we are HQ Accra, our audience is the rest of the world. So we are building, planning, promoting for a global audience. And by virtue of being African, we also do have a fair number of our listenership, at least across countries, coming from Africa as well. Now, as to how Ghana is doing compared to everybody else, I would say we're doing pretty well. I say pretty well because you also don't want to factor in the reality that Ghana, for as much noise as we make, we're really quite a small country.
True.
You understand? So when you look across the continent and then you see the leaders when it comes to perhaps numbers, you have your Kenya, you have your South Africa, you have your Nigeria, you have Egypt, Tanzania, actually. Those are huge populations. So they are coming in with a whole swath of their population, either having access to internet, smartphones, and all of that. So there's already that captive/ready audience.
Yeah.
We are working not with a smaller number, but proportionally, we're working with a smaller population. It means we're working with a smaller number. But I think if we could go pound for pound, I think Ghanaian podcasts are showing that we can also be right up there with the best. And that's something that I think 2 years ago, the Spotify Africa Podcast Grant showed that when you think about the best podcasts on the continent, GCR Accra is right there with all of them. So at the end of the day, it's all about putting out best quality content and not just GCR, but then I think the ecosystem is all working and moving towards that.
It's beautiful. Let's talk quickly about like brands and partnerships and things like that. I mean, of course, Spotify Africa did some stuff with GCR. I've seen Sin City Accra guys in the news once or twice. It's pretty great. It's pretty brilliant. So in terms of like the PR and the brands that you guys are, you guys have obtained or working with, how do you think that's come about? Is people like reached out to you, or, like reached out, or maybe it's a combination of reaching out to them and, they saying, yes, we want to feature you. How has that kind of come about?
For us, I think the best, what's the right word? The best situation has been us reaching out or them reaching out and there being mutual interest. Because when it's a brand and our goals are aligned and also our values are aligned, we've realized that the conversation becomes much easier. It becomes much, okay, we all want to do this. We know we're on the same page. It's now about just, we're just fussy about this, that, and then we get it over the line. So we do spend a fair bit in terms of reaching out to brands and partners that we like to work with. And sometimes it's a slog. Like there are conversations that we've had for 2 years going on, it's like, Kyrie Reddy is like, I bet I'll hit you up next quarter. We sustain the conversation. We sustain the relationship because one thing about us with GCR is we also realize that there's an intersection between what we want to do and what other people, so partners, brands, even our host, our team want to do, So like, let's say we take you, Adrian, we would want to work with you, but it would have to be something that you are passionate about. And then it will have to be something that is also aligned with what we are trying to do. So it's that intersection that we want to work with you at. Otherwise, I could tell you other great projects that we want to do, but if it's not moving you, it's not moving you. And that's completely fair. It's just that it gets really tricky to find out what's there. Okay, this is what sparks you and this is what sparks us. But that's why that constant communication and dialogue has proved useful to us, because as we are talking, we are finding out more about each other. And then we're also learning, oh, this is what you want to do, or this something where it's like, oh snap, we've had this in the back pockets and I think it's something that you would enjoy. And then damn, it works.
That's brilliant. What would you say has been, doing this for 8 years, getting to veteran status, it's been some of the highlights, has there been any like memorable moments that you've had on this journey with you and your co-founder and the team?
Yeah, I think
that stand out.
One, that first GCR live was a highlight just because it was like, damn, all these people actually showed up for us. And
do you remember the turnout roughly? Was it huge and it was more intimate? Kind of like,
it was more intimate. You probably got like, I want to say 50, 60
That's not
people.
bad. That's
Yeah,
not
it wasn't
bad.
bad. Like for the space we had, we filled up the space.
That's it. Yeah.
It
That's
was
what
dope.
matters.
Yeah.
That's what matters, right?
Yeah. And I just remember it was like, it's done. Why are they still here?
Yeah.
Because we wanted to go. I remember we planned to go out. We planned to leave after to go party, but we stayed longer because people were still there. Like just to show you, not weren't confident. We just didn't think people would want to stay. So that was definitely a highlight. I mentioned at the start that when we started, we were recording at a Spintech studio. We moved out of that Spintech studio 2 years into our run into a nice little cute space that we called the Cube, and we've kept that name for our studio spaces. Since then, we've had 2 moves, and we are now new space. All of those have been highlights. Having our first space, and that was at the Speaker Tea House. They loaned us their little warehouse to use for our studio space. Having our first space was a really big deal for us because then it gave us control over schedule.
Yeah.
It gave us a bit more intentionality as to how we want things to look, how we want things to sound, how we want things to feel, and what we want to put out. It was that final piece to we making everything work, and it's on our own time. We moved to our office space in Osu the year after. We stayed there for a year, and now we are in our new space. So all of those have been highlights. The Spotify news was definitely a highlight as well because there was validation to that, because that was us putting in the work. And in as much as we felt assured of the quality of work that we were doing and the SA team was putting in, it really is great to also know that it's not just a feeling. It's not just what you are telling yourself or what the team is reinforcing, but then an external source that has no stakes in the matter came in and said, yeah, we think this is good too. So that was also extremely validating. Our Mosaic event, when we reworked it, seeing what that turn up has been, seeing what that partnership has been, the partners that just completely bought into what we were selling. Because again, there isn't any events that was just backed by podcasting. One, podcasting is this really growing industry space in Ghana right now. And we were saying off the back of that, we think we can have a successful event. You get what I mean? So them buying into that, then believing, and then us seeing what that is, those was also highlights as well. And there are all these other individual ones where you see, it's this little things where you see hosts take a bit more ownership, when you also feel and see that growth level. Also with the production team as well, when you see things going on and they don't necessarily have to be a part of that process. Those are highlights I really do cherish, because then there's a sustainability to what we are building. And I look back to when we first started and I really had to be a part of everything. The goal really is to have our shows, our team be able to essentially create their vision, what they want within GCR, and just have GCR be that space that hopefully amplifies and builds and gets everybody supercharged up. So
that's incredible, man.
Yeah.
And I feel like, so all of the hosts, do they come to the studio space to record? Or
other than our ATW boys who record remotely, they are our stubborn ones, but everybody comes through.
Everybody comes through. Yeah, that's brilliant. And that will lead to kind of control the process. And
I mean, we have a
be consistent with the sound quality.
Exactly. We have a booking schedule. Shout out to Kofi, who should be managing that soon. So there are ways to, it's one of those things where this is very much a creative endeavor. Like, we are doing this because we are passionate, and this is the thing that makes our hearts beat. But we're also building a business, and business comes with systems and processes. And as unsexy or boring as those things sound, they are important because they help us build that framework, that foundation that makes it easy for creativity to just, jump as high as you go, because you know that there's that firm foundation for you when you land back up. So that's been that balance at GCR we've been looking to strike. How do we build this process so that our team can be as creative, go wild, go ape, go nuts? But we need to first have that system and allow you to be the fullest version of yourself creatively. So it's that balance, is that effort that we are trying to figure out, but it's been fun. Yeah.
Brilliant. It must feel like a record label sometimes when do you get that feeling? I mean, I get that feeling. I mean, if those that have podcast networks, it's like running a record label in a way, like a modern day record label. Does it feel like that?
It does. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because there's also this really insane, intense element of human connection to it as well, because everybody's motivated differently. Everybody sparks differently, and everybody is also trying to do different things with their shows. So having that constant engagement, having that checking in, yeah, you're right. It's like we are managing talent, and we're trying to help talent be the best possible version that it can be. And it really can be that. It can be that.
Incredible. It's been such an incredible journey you guys have had. Really enjoyed this conversation, Kwadzo. What tips would you give to people that want to kind of move into this space, podcasting in general, or maybe podcasting in Africa?
So we've had a fair number of these conversations, and if I had to say why, I think we've probably lasted as long as we've had. One, we're crazy. Two, it's also been consistency. When we first started, for our first 2 years, our schedule was, we recorded on a Saturday. I edited everything Saturday evening to Sunday. Episode went on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for 2 years straight. And we were doing listenership starting with 50, and then it was growing to 150, thereabout. So for the first 2 years, we just pumped it out. Like, it really wasn't about the numbers aren't growing. It was just, this was a thing that we wanted out, and come hell or high water, we were going to make sure the episodes came out. So that consistency, it helped us. We made mistakes. We learned from them quickly. We did like a speed run. Nothing beats consistency.
100%.
Because that's how you get better. That's how you get feedback. That's how you see where your blind spots are. That's how you see what you would like to change and move toward. So one, be definitely crazy if you're trying to get into this podcasting space, because there's a whole lot that would not make sense to everybody else on the outside, because a reality is this is very much a new space, at least in Ghana right now. We are carving out, we are trying to make things work in terms of it's being an operational business. So there's that. But consistency at least puts you in a conversation, or at least gets you towards whatever your goal is with your show.
Absolutely. I can totally relate, going on almost 200 episodes, I can totally relate, and consistency is definitely key. And it's one of the first pieces of advice I give to anyone who asks me advice, so definitely consistency. Before we go, Kwadzo, we just talked about, all of the moving parts of podcasting, and consistency, etc. Of course, like any business, money's the lifeblood, and you need to keep the lights on. These lights on. You don't have to share all the ins and outs or everything. Just tell us, in terms of GCR, like, what are kind of like some of the revenue streams that you guys have to kind of like keep the business going, keep the podcast network going?
On that end, I don't think we're doing anything special for most businesses. So the typical podcast model, there's advertising. So advertising on the podcast, LPMs and all of that. So host read ads. We have sponsorships. So for us, we're able to extend that also to our events and all of that. And then partnerships as well. So that's also a good way to get some change in. And then with our events, we have gate sales, tickets, merch sales, all of that. But again, with any business that's being built, the first couple of years is really going to be internal funds that you're able to raise, generate, and mobilize. Because unless you have a really, really cool idea for a business that everybody just buys into immediately, for the first couple of years, if not months, you would have to be the one to figure out how to keep the lights on. So there's also that balance where it's like, okay, how do I keep overheads low, but then make sure that the business has enough runway to see what happens in 3 months, to see where we are. So that's it for our money. Our money stuff.
That's brilliant. It's good to hear that there's multiple revenue streams coming in, because in Ghana, the dumb saw, when a light goes off, you feel it harder. Understand? When there's no money, you feel it harder in Africa than anywhere else. So it's pretty impressive.
And you just have to be aggressive and coming up with not new, but ways to make monetization work.
Absolutely. Absolutely brilliant. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where can everybody find Gold Coast Report, GCR, and listen to the shows and connect with you and GCR?
So we have a website and funny story, we kind of had to build our own internal website because when we started, people were deleting the Apple Podcast app from their phones.
Wow.
Because that was like an extra 15 megabytes. And if they were using that, like take it off because that could be a photo or a video, you know? So we kind of had to quickly, how do we get people to listen to us without them feeling like they need to download an app or keep an app that they would never use? So listen to GCR.com. That's where we have all our shows, our events, tickets, everything is all on there. So it's just like a handy link that we're able to have our digital presence and everything that we put out. So once you go on there and you navigate, you see the different shows, social media handles, personal handles, all of that. It's on there.
Brilliant. I guess it's a real challenge sometimes in Africa, like the data, especially because the digital adoption is not quite there. Like you have Facebook Lite now, even Uber Lite, certain apps to kind of accommodate the African user may not have access to as much data. Really quickly, future. What does it look like for you guys, plans 2024, future? Really quickly.
The future is always fun. I think we are in a new space. So come end of year, we're hoping to have fully settled in terms of what we want to do. Next time you come, we should hopefully have a really cool mural up there. We are still settling in. We have a space now for our own events as well. So that's pretty exciting what we can do. We're also hoping to open that up to the community as well. So it's not just GCR wanting to do stuff, but if Adrian had something in mind, it's like, okay, we have this weekend open, come use our space. That would be pretty cool because I think for us, the realization or the motivation now increasingly is becoming, how do we carry our community along with us? There are things we want to do, but then we also recognize that there are things that everybody who's a part of GCR, and for me, it's not just our production team and our hosts and our editors and our photographers and all of that, but there's also our listeners as well. They also form a part of GCR. They're the ones who's listening or ship gets us where we are. So then how do we listen to you and position what you care about also and bring that to the table? So hopefully 2024 sees us be very busy. And if we are still around the next 2 years, that'll be 10 years. That will be a decade. That should be a fun, that should be a fun celebration.
Be around to kind of celebrate. That's quite a remarkable milestone. Great.
Looking forward to it.
Guys, I mean, we celebrated 3 years, 2022, and we had a little, party in Chatham. Funny enough.
We might have a huge ass bender. So let's see. It will be a rage. It should be fun. Yeah.
That'll be crazy. With what you guys will do for 10 years, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Well, Country's been fantastic.
Adrian, thank you so much.
GCR on social media.
So I would say go to listen to GCR.com, but I think on Twitter, we are Gold Coast Report. On Instagram is the Gold Coast Report. And then from there are links everywhere that will take you to our TikTok, anywhere else that we are. Yeah.
Cool. We'll make sure all of that is in the show notes. You guys, once again, can head over to thesoundofaccra.com/GCR. That's thesoundofaccra.com/GCR. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Probably do a part 2 sometime because there's other stuff I would like to dive into, community, listenership. Like there's so much we can talk about. But yeah, let us know what you think in the conversation. Get in the comments. Maybe we'll do like a IG live or something. I don't know, YouTube live, whatever, right? Let us know what you think of the episode and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And we'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching.
Cheers.